The overview of the Bible is not a story that we're talking about. It's the events in the calendar of God. This is a survey of God's timetable from the beginning of time till after time is no more. The survey is the story of rescue of the wrecked humanity. We're part of that botched humanity in slavery to sin, at the point that we're rescued and delivered through Christ Jesus. The quest of this overview is to explain to a doubting heart what a new heart looks like and what we can have in the beginning. In Matthew 5:10 through 12, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Underline that, righteousness. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of Jesus. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Suffering takes many forms. Life in general can be disruptive. In the ancient world, idol worship was primary in the center of the town. When you were invited as a guest to dine out, they would take a wine cup and pour it on the ground to honor an idol. Cut off from these practices, we can be cut off from social occasions. We can have disruptions in our home life. One member can be a believer and the rest unbelievers. It can lead to anguish and even divisions in the family. In my family, I was the first one to find the Lord. The first in many generations in my family line. We belonged to the great heathen pool. We had moral standing, but we had no particular mooring with the Lord. I was a 10-year-old. I found the Lord, and it became an extraordinary experience for me. I found myself in love with Jesus at 10 years old, and that love at my age is never diminished. Understand, my mother-in-law, she was a solitary in their family. And for a long period of time, she was looked down on as some kind of person who had missed the mark. And yet, at some point, she became the focal point. When somebody was sick in the family, they would call for my mother-in-law to come and to help them. And she would go and spend time with them and bless them and help them. And she began to lead many in the family to the Lord. That family is going to find their way to heaven because of her graciousness during the time of persecution. In the New Testament, there were slanders about believers. They were called cannibals of all things, incestuous, more because of their misconception of what they did in their meetings. Politically, the Roman Empire had many gods throughout the empire, so that the unifying of the people, they created emperor worship. Partaking means that you were loyal to the emperor, and if you didn't, it meant you were disloyal. Matthew 5:10 through 16. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness. When people insult you, when they find all kinds of evil against you because of Jesus. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it make salt again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out on the pathway and trampled underfoot. We're going to be looking at 5 absolute that interact together. We're going to be talking about them separately: persecution, murder, salt, light, and praise. These are intertwined, but we are going to talk about them separately. The servant is never above his master. Slander is found in Matthew 10:24 and 25. Persecuted for righteousness' sake is found in these verses. First Peter 2:19 and 20. For it is commendable if someone bears up under pain and understand unjust suffering, because they have consciousness that is settled in God. If you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it, what is that? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, you're commended by God. I'm going into some detail about personalized suffering in Matthew 11:12. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. Therefore, the different forms of persecution: insult, violence, slander, many more, but these are one of the most common. Blessed are you when these falsely accused character assassinations happen. Philippians 3:10, I want to know Christ, yes, to know the power of the resurrection and participate in the suffering, becoming like him in his death. Suffering because of his produces great value and is like the kind of what Jesus suffered for us. Rejoice, the word rejoice here, when people despitefully use you and links you with the prophets. In Isaiah 6:9 and 10, it says, go tell this people, be ever hearing but never understanding, be ever seeing but never receive. Make your heart, this people is calloused. Make their ears dull and close their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn to be healed. In the middle of persecution, stay true. Show your goodness in the middle of persecution and conflicts. I began to witness to a man at work many years ago. The man wasn't receptive, but I kept pressing the gospel into him. And one day he says, I'm moving several hundred miles away and you'll never be able to speak to me again. And I said, what would you do if you saw me walk down the lane toward your house? I would hide in my house and lock my door, he told me. I said, I won't come, but I'm sending someone before you even move in. I'm praying that God will give you a witness that will be so irresistible that you cannot change that. And he says, it comes, I'll threaten him. And I said, your threats are nothing compared to the power of God to change your heart. We had a confrontation. The owner of the business came to me and he said, you're too bold. And I said, you're right, I'll try to be more consoling when I speak. And he said, good. And then he whispered in my ear, he said, I'm a believer too, and I want you to know that you have the privilege of witnessing to whoever you plan on witnessing to. It was a glorious day. It was an amazing moment. I knew that this man, even though he was resisting with a kind of a bitterness, there would be a day when he would be born again. I had confidence in that. There's disruption, there's persecution. It can be social, financial, it can be in families. The reason of the early church there was these disruption is because they were falsely accused of being many things. They had the book of Revelations, which said the world would go up in flames. And they called that divisionary, and they called that inflammatory, and they shouldn't be saying these things. The reason the early church was disruptive is because they were falsely accused of being many things. The politicalness of the Caesar worship, and they refused to worship him. Persecution is the root of glory. In our modern times, a country has been sealed off from the Christian faith, and nothing can get in. But in our day, we have this amazing thing. It's called the internet, but it's also can be vocal. They can hear it almost like used to have radio. People in their homes can hear the gospel and can turn to it. One nation, they said, could never be turned to the Lord. And many people in that nation, it's the fastest growing nation of believers in the world. Persecution is a route to glory. Persecution shows our love for the Lord and our loyalty to Him. Persecutions are very similar in the Old Testament prophets that shows us how they were persecuted in Hebrews chapter 11. Persecution opens the door. It's hard to understand how this works, but it touches the heart of God, and He pours out His power. Opens the door for many people to find Him. Persecution is one route that God uses. The first martyr was a man given to giving miracles and enormous things in his life. And he's being stoned. And he gets a vision of heaven. And he sees Jesus opening up his arms to receive him to glory. And he dies there on the spot.